Happy Friday, folks, and welcome to WatchGuard Security Week in Review, a video podcast dedicated to quickly summarizing the biggest information and network security stories each week and to sharing practical security advice along the way. I'm your host and a big-time security nerd, Corey Nachreiner, and this is the episode for the week starting August 17th, 2015. Let's jump right in with this week's Daily Security Bites. Today's story is a global mobile phone hack that can allow you to track or monitor any mobile phone in the world. This actually comes from an exclusive story from Australia's 60 Minutes. During it, the reporter hooked up with some German researchers and he showed a hack that would allow attackers to actually monitor any mobile phone in the world if you knew its number. You could actually intercept and listen in on calls, you can intercept SMS messages, and you could even track that user real time as he was going from cell tower to cell tower. In any case, it was kind of an interesting report, but there's now stories that it might be overblown. Recently, Gizmodo released an article showing that in order to do this, the German government had to give the attacker, in this case the researcher, access to the SS7 network. All these attacks were based on a standard carriers use called SS7, or Signaling System 7, which is something that's been around for decades. It's a standard to handle phone calls, which has been updated with mobile phones. And now that we have mobile phones that go international where they're roaming on other carrier networks, these carriers had to set up a standard where they could share information and make sure that phones could always route information no matter where they were in the world. In any case, it is true that SS7 is a vulnerable protocol. It actually doesn't use any authentication. A researcher called Tobias Engel had a great CCC, which stands for Chaos Communication Congress. It's a big German security conference. Anyways, Tobias had a really good presentation back in December of last year showing some of the flaws in SS7 and how once you accessed SS7 you can do all kinds of things like rerouting phone calls, listening in, and doing all kinds of dangerous things. However, how hard is it for an average criminal or attacker to get access to SS7? That is the big question. According to Tobias Engel, there are three ways that don't require you to have carrier or government access. The three he points out are, first of all, some carriers actually resell access to this network for just a couple euros a month. Basically, say you're trying to set up SMS servers for some service you do, you can actually sign up with your carrier to get access to this to do your SMS service. So you can go directly to them. He also pointed out there's been vulnerabilities in carriers' networks that have allowed attackers to get access to them before. And finally, he also points out femtocell hacking. A femtocell is a device that can extend a cellular network to your home, and apparently some researchers have hacked femtocells and gained access to the SS7 network. So it is plausible that an attacker can get access to SS7. In either case, it was a very interesting story on Australian 60 Minutes. It might be a little overstated, but it is true that carriers and governments may be able to track you wherever you are with your mobile phone, so something to think about. By the way, there's no practical takeaways here. If you're a consumer, there's nothing you can do about it. This is really something that carriers need to solve by filtering things or adding more authentication to their standards. Today's story is twofold: an emergency Internet Explorer update and an update to the Ashley Madison breach. First, sorry I didn't post a video yesterday. I was at an off-site meeting. Anyways, let's start with yesterday's emergency Internet Explorer update. Microsoft released an out-of-band bulletin that fixes a vulnerability in Internet Explorer, a memory corruption vulnerability that essentially allows an attacker to remotely execute code on your computer. All you have to do is visit a website that contains malicious code or that maybe points to malicious code through advertisements or some other link. And by the way, this is a vulnerability that attackers are currently exploiting in the wild. So long story short, if you have Internet Explorer 7.3.11 for Windows, you need to install this update immediately. The second story relates to a previous video I did talking about how Ashley Madison, the popular affair site, had a big security breach. Well, in any case, the hacktivists that threatened to release this data have finally done so. Basically, since Ashley Madison didn't shut down their website, they finally released a Tor link, a anonymous network link where you can download almost 10 gigabytes of customer information. And this customer information, of course, contains the names, the addresses, the the email addresses, the phone numbers of all the users. Now there's some good news and bad news here. The good news is, as far as your password credentials, it looks like Ashley Madison was using a hashing algorithm called bcrypt. That doesn't mean attackers can't crack weak passwords, but it does make it a whole lot harder. Now the bad news is, while there's some mixed reports on this, at least one security researcher has said it does contain valid credit card information. So if you actually used your credit card at Ashley Madison, you might be concerned with that. In any case, very interesting story. Hopefully you're not an Ashley Madison member, but if you are, you definitely need to change your password, and if you used your credit card on the site, you might need to do some credit monitoring. Today's story is yet another update on the Ashley Madison data breach. A few weeks ago, Ashley Madison, the popular affair site, was breached by hacktivists who stole a bunch of data and threatened to disclose it. As you know, in yesterday's video, I talked about how they did disclose some of that data. But today, the Tor or Onion site that was actually sharing this data released yet another update, a new file that contains 16 more gigabytes of data stolen from the Ashley Madison attack. This data seems to include a whole bunch of source code, basically Ashley Madison's website source code and some of the source code for their applications. It also contains apparently the email of Ashley Madison's CEO, and finally there's even reports that some of the documents in this leak contain things like their PayPal passwords, which seem to be very insecure. Anyways, just thought it was an interesting new update. This is certainly very embarrassing for Ashley Madison, as they seem to be hemorrhaging a whole bunch of data, whether it be their customers or their own. As a takeaway, this is probably a great illustration of why you really need to encrypt your most sensitive data. Suppose an attacker does get in, it might be a nice extra layer of protection to have the data they might steal encrypted so that they can't disclose all this embarrassing information. Today's story is a new zero-day vulnerability in OS X. This week, news came out that an Italian teenage researcher, a guy named Luca Todesco, found a zero-day vulnerability in the latest version of OS X Yosemite. This is actually a local privilege escalation vulnerability. That means if a bad guy can run malicious code on your OS X machine, he can gain full privileges on that machine. Now what's interesting about this story is the researcher actually released his code and his findings on GitHub before actually letting Apple know about it. So he hasn't given Apple time to patch. Now he has released a third-party patch called NullGuard, which can mitigate the issue. That said, I really don't recommend you run third-party updates or patches. Now the good news is this is a local privilege escalation, so unless an attacker already has access to your computer, he can't use it. The takeaway here is pretty simple, of course. Next month, I expect Apple's going to fix this vulnerability. If you're an OS X user, you definitely want to get that update when it comes out, or even set OS X to update automatically. Well, that's it for this week. I hope you found something interesting and learned a new way to protect your network. As always, there's a lot of other security stories this week. If you want more regular security news, be sure to follow our blog at blog.watchguard.com or at watchguard-security-center.com. Besides posting our video there, I also have a big list of references for all the other security stories I missed this week. If you're interested, go check it out. You can also follow me on Twitter. I'm at SecAdept, or you can follow WatchGuard at WatchGuard Tech. And finally, if you want these videos immediately, be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel. One other thing, I've been analyzing Mr. Robot every week at GeekWire. If you're interested in that show, I recommend you go check it out. And finally, I'll be traveling next week, so I won't be able to do videos as often as normal. Nonetheless, I'll try to get as many out as I can. As always, thanks for watching, and here at WatchGuard, we're rooting for you.